Something is watching you from the forest and it does not have the shape of any animal you have ever seen. Tonight I am sharing 5 accounts from people who encountered things that should not exist. A paranormal hobbyist named Dario records audio in abandoned locations. Not for fame. Not for content. He does it because silence in empty places is never really silence, and he wants to prove that. One evening he drove out to a collapsed textile mill on the edge of an industrial zone that had been dead for 40 years. Weeds growing through concrete. Rusted looms frozen mid-rotation behind shattered windows. He set up a directional microphone in what used to be the main production floor and sat on an overturned crate with his headphones on, listening. For 20 minutes he heard only wind moving through broken glass and the occasional groan of settling metal. Then a voice. Not faint. Not buried in static. A clear female voice, mid-sentence, as though she had been talking to someone for a while and Dario had only just tuned in. She said, and I told him not to come back because the walls remember everything. Then nothing. Dead air. He rewound the recording and played it again. Same words. Same cadence. Same eerie clarity, as if whoever spoke was standing 3 feet from the microphone. Dario checked every corner of that building. He walked the perimeter. He checked the parking lot. Not a single person within half a mile. He went back to the crate, pressed record again, and asked out loud who was speaking. The response came 11 seconds later. A different voice. Male this time. Lower. Almost bored. She already told you. The walls remember. Dario packed his equipment and left within 2 minutes. He has returned to dozens of locations since then. He has never gone back to that mill. When I asked him why, he said something that stuck with me. He said most of the time when you record in empty buildings you catch fragments. Half words. Whispers that could be anything. What he heard that night was a conversation between 2 people who knew he was listening and did not care. That distinction, between something accidentally captured and something deliberately delivered, is what made him understand he was not documenting the dead. He was intruding on them. Now picture a different kind of encounter. Not voices from invisible mouths but something standing in front of you, solid and impossible. A fisherman named Gasper has worked night trawls off the coast of a small island for over 30 years. He knows every sound the ocean makes. The slap of waves against a steel hull, the whine of cable pulling through winches, the deep percussion of a diesel engine idling. He knows what dolphins sound like when they surface alongside the boat. He knows the difference between a whale blow and a rogue swell hitting the bow. What he heard one night in late November did not belong to any of those categories. They were anchored about 9 nautical miles offshore, waiting for the tide to shift before pulling nets. The sea was flat. Windless. Gasper was on deck alone smoking a cigarette when he noticed the water around the boat had gone completely still. Not calm. Still. No current. No ripple. The surface looked like poured glass extending in every direction. Then from somewhere below the hull came a rhythmic knocking. 3 slow strikes, evenly spaced. A pause. 3 more. He leaned over the rail and pointed his deck light straight down into the water. What he saw made him step backward so fast he tripped over a coil of rope and hit the deck hard. Something pale and enormous was drifting just beneath the surface. It was not a fish. It was not a whale. It had no definable shape he could compare to anything he had encountered in 3 decades of open water work. Just a massive pale form, easily twice the length of his boat, hovering motionless directly underneath them. And then it knocked again. 3 deliberate strikes against the bottom of the hull. From the inside of the shape, as though it had limbs or appendages pressing upward against the steel. Gasper scrambled to the wheelhouse and started the engine. The moment the propeller engaged, the thing descended. He watched it sink on the fish finder, a solid return signal dropping fast, until it passed beyond the range of the sonar. They pulled anchor and moved 6 miles east before resuming the trawl. He never told his crew what he saw. He only told his wife, years later, and only because she found him one night sitting on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning unable to sleep. The ocean holds things we have not named yet. Gasper is certain of that now. Some encounters happen in wild places far from human comfort. Others happen in rooms where you should feel safest. A university student named Ines moved into a shared flat during her second year. The building was old, built in the 1920s, and her room had a window that faced an interior courtyard no one ever used. The courtyard was just a square of cracked tile with a drain in the center and 4 walls of windows looking down into it from different apartments. Ines noticed quickly that every other window facing that courtyard was permanently shuttered or covered with dark fabric. She thought it was a coincidence until she started hearing footsteps down there at night. Not the kind that pass through. The kind that circle. A slow measured loop around the perimeter of the courtyard, step after step, always at the same pace, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. She looked down one night and saw nothing. The courtyard was empty. But the footsteps continued, loud and distinct, echoing off tile. She recorded the sound on her phone and played it for her flatmate the next morning. Her flatmate listened for about 5 seconds and then told Ines to cover her window and never open it again at night. When Ines pressed for an explanation, the flatmate said the previous tenant of her room had also heard the footsteps. That tenant had done something Ines had not done yet. She had called down into the courtyard, asked who was there. The footsteps stopped immediately. And then, according to the flatmate, they started coming from inside the building. Climbing the stairwell. Slowly. 1 floor at a time. They stopped outside the previous tenant's door and did not resume for the rest of the night. That tenant moved out the following week and refused to explain why. Ines covered her window that same evening. She lived in that flat for another 8 months and heard the courtyard footsteps on dozens of nights. She never once called down. She never once opened the curtain after dark. Some invitations do not require words. Sometimes just acknowledging that something is there is enough to let it know exactly where you are. The 4th account belongs to a retired firefighter named Walter who spent 26 years responding to emergencies in a sprawling rural district. He has seen death more times than he can count. House fires, car wrecks, industrial accidents. None of that prepared him for what happened during a search and rescue call in the winter of 2009. A hiker had gone missing in a forested mountain range. Walter's team was dispatched at nightfall, which meant they would be combing steep terrain in darkness with headlamps and handheld radios. They split into pairs and fanned out along the ridge. Walter was with a younger firefighter named Gil. They had been walking for about 90 minutes, calling out the hiker's name, when Gil stopped and grabbed Walter's arm. He pointed his headlamp toward a ravine to their left. Standing at the bottom of the ravine, roughly 40 meters below them, was a figure. Tall. Motionless. Facing directly up at them as if it had been waiting. Walter called out, identifying himself as rescue personnel. No response. He tried again. Nothing. Gil suggested it might be the missing hiker, injured and disoriented. They started descending carefully using tree roots as handholds. When they had covered about half the distance, Walter looked down again and the figure was gone. Not walking away. Gone. The ravine floor was bare rock and dead leaves with no cover large enough to hide behind. They reached the bottom and swept their lights in every direction. Empty. No footprints in the soft ground. No broken branches. No indication that anyone had stood there moments before. They radioed the other teams and learned something that made the hair on Walter's neck stand rigid. 2 other pairs had reported seeing the same thing. A tall motionless figure standing in low ground, facing upward, never responding to calls, vanishing before anyone could reach it. The missing hiker was found the next morning 2 valleys over, alive and unharmed. He had sheltered in a rock overhang and slept through the entire search. Whatever the three teams saw that night was not the hiker. Walter filed his report without mentioning the figure. Gil did the same. They never discussed it between themselves. Some things resist language. They sit in a part of your memory that words cannot reach, and they stay there, perfectly preserved, for the rest of your life. The final account comes from a woman named Lucia who teaches piano in a conservatory housed inside a renovated 18th century chapel. The building kept its original stone walls and vaulted ceilings, but everything else was modernized. Fluorescent lights, laminate flooring over the old flagstones, acoustic panels bolted to the nave. Lucia teaches late sessions on Thursdays, often finishing around 10 at night when the building is empty except for a security guard stationed at the front desk 2 floors below. One Thursday she was alone in her studio packing her sheet music when she heard a sustained note come from the grand piano behind her. Not a chord. A single key. Middle C, held down as though a finger was pressing it. She turned around and the key was visibly depressed. She watched it release slowly, as if the pressure was being withdrawn with great care. Lucia stood there for several seconds waiting. Then the adjacent key sounded. C sharp. Also held. Also released slowly. Then D. One note at a time, ascending the scale with mechanical precision, each key pressing down and lifting as though an invisible hand was walking its fingers up the keyboard. It reached the highest octave and stopped. Lucia did not run. She is not the kind of person who runs. She sat down on the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and played a descending scale back down to middle C. A response. A conversation. For about 10 seconds nothing happened. Then the piano played again. This time not a scale. A melody. Something she did not recognize. Something old and dissonant and achingly sad, played one note at a time with long pauses between each, as if the player was remembering the piece from very far away and struggling to hold each note in memory long enough to find the next. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then silence. Lucia waited another full minute. Nothing more came. She packed her bag and left the building. She told the security guard on her way out that she had heard music from upstairs, and he looked at her with an expression she will never forget. Not surprise. Recognition. He said every Thursday night after the last teacher leaves he hears it too. Single notes drifting down the stairwell. Always the same time. Always stopping before 11. Lucia still teaches her Thursday sessions. She has never heard the melody again. But every week when she finishes packing she pauses at the door and listens. Just in case whatever lives in that old chapel has remembered another piece and wants someone to hear it. Some presences do not want to frighten you. They just want proof that someone is still listening.